I want to take a look at that passage again that Will read for us from that 10th chapter of Acts. Because as Will was reading it, what I am starting to be prone to doing, even as I'm reading the scripture passage prior to worship, the week, sometimes weeks ahead, I still like to be able to hear someone else read it. And as I hear it, there are some times that I jot down words that stick out for me. I might even invite you to start doing the same thing when you gather here on a Sunday morning. As the scripture is being read in your bulletins, if you want to write out the words that just sort of jump out at you, or the questions that you might end up having. If you want to jot those down, if you want to talk to me after church or throughout the week, or with someone else. If you hear something that I say that you disagree with, that's okay too. Let's talk about those things. Except for you, Gail. I know. There's a phrase, poking the bear, right? I've come to learn that one since I've been here. The first word that came to mind as I was hearing Will share the text this morning was fear. I don't know how many of us have grown up hearing the phrase that we are to fear God. As I got older, it's like, well, why do I want to be in relationship with a God that I fear, that I am scared of? Until I began to go deeper and realize that the meaning fear is very different in the ancient languages than what most of us associate today. So I'm first of all going to invite you with that word fear. To fear God is not to be sitting and trembling because you're afraid of what might happen if you break a certain rule. The meaning of that is nuanced of to have great awe. To be so inspired by that which is divine, by that which is holy, by that which is God. It's absolutely amazing and at times beyond comprehension. That is the fear of God, not trembling and shaking and being afraid. So if we can take that understanding, regardless of how we may have heard it and understood it growing up, we can then begin to unpack the story that was read a little bit more. Because the next couple words that I have here are vision. There was this vision. God speaking not only to Peter, a character we're very familiar with in our faith tradition, but to a Roman centurion, one of those people who, as we learn, also feared God. But here's where I'm going to take us back. Doesn't mean he was laying and quaking. It meant that he also had a great, overwhelming sense of awe of something greater than himself. As the story moves forward, God speaks to this person who is outside of the Jewish faith and connects him with one of the pillars of the Christian faith. Right? Peter, rock, foundation of the Christian faith. Peter, who had grown up learning the rules of his faith. Perhaps he also was told that he needed to eat his broccoli and his corn, but also had been taught other dietary restrictions within the Jewish faith, those dietary laws. What is unclean and what is unclean. What can be eaten and what cannot be eaten. Now, I have friends who are Jewish, and I have an appreciation for their living into the customs of their faith, even if I don't understand them, and even if I don't agree with them, really doesn't matter. I can appreciate that that is the way they celebrate their faith, and I'm good with that. But within the context of this story, Peter, who has been raised knowing the laws of his faith, is hungry. He's gone up to the rooftop. He's hungry. And in his vision, he sees a sheet coming down full of all kinds of food, to include those foods that were restricted, that he had been taught, you do not eat. So perhaps he thought, when God said, take and eat, he thought perhaps it was a test. I'm going to be faithful to that which I have been told. I'm going to stand tough. But the crux of the story is that God says, I am giving this to you. If I have made it clean, if I have created this, how are you to call it unclean? I have mentioned that as we're going through the open and affirming conversations, I want to be that pastor who is available for all of you, regardless of how you think about something, believe about something, how you were taught about something. I don't think this is an issue that we take sides on. I haven't seen that in any of the churches that I have served. I've never thought it was healthy that we take sides, that we set up winners and losers, but that we have faithful conversation about the way we have been raised, the way we have been taught. What rules, laws, or whatever other language we want to use. Any of the rest of you have things that were taught to you by your parents that when you were younger didn't make any sense? And as you got older, yeah, okay, I get that, especially if you became parents yourself. But have there also been times that you have to question things that you were taught growing up? Whether it's from your parents, or teachers, or even pastors. That as you've gotten older and you've experienced things around you in life, you go, I don't think I believe that anymore. I'm not sure I agree with that anymore. I question that now. For me, that's the beauty part in the United Church of Christ. When we say no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, we truly mean that. Whether you are brand new to the faith of Christ or whether you have been raised up in it from your very earliest recollections and memories. And regardless if you come from a variety of traditions or no traditions at all, you're welcome here to be in sacred conversation with one another, to make faith real for you and your family, to struggle with the life that's outside and make sense of it with people who love you. I shared that yesterday we celebrated the life of one who was very special in this church to many of you. And as I was standing out on the front steps, some people go, you're the pastor. Why are you out telling people where they can park and welcoming them in? Because I want to make sure that one of the very first voices, very first faces that they get is somebody who's warmly welcoming them in. And I had somebody who say, well, tell me a little bit more about your church. Would I be, and I'm not making this part up, this person started talking to me about they are searching for a church. And they plan to get married at some point, but they're not married now. And they have been told by churches that they have been visiting that that's not acceptable, that's against the rules. They aren't welcome there. Here's where I went out on a step of faith and said, you know, I feel pretty confident that you'd be welcome here. Even if there are other folks in this congregation that go, I don't think that's how I would. We're not as much of a rules as a collective, even as some of us might be individually. Where do I want to go with this? In this time, as we discern who we are as a church, as we explore this whole open and affirming concept, it's more than just sexuality. It is a matter of saying we can be a church to all people. For there was a time within our past, maybe not this congregation, but within the collective Christian past, that people of different skin colors would not worship together because it was against the rules. There were a time that when people gathered to celebrate Christ, men and women were separated, one being seen far superior than the other. For those were the rules that they understood and were raised with. Now I can say, thank God. Thank God and those who follow Christ that many of us have said, those make no sense. And they go against the gospel and the rule that says, love one another as you would be loved. So when we have these conversations, whether it's over an affirming or who else we might invite in, my simple rule, I hate using that word, would be to refer us back to saying, who would Jesus welcome? Who would Jesus accept? Who would Jesus love? Within our scripture this morning, an early founder of the church needed to realize it wasn't really food that was the crux of that story. I want to take you back. Remember, there was this Roman that he needed to realize was also a child of God. It was no longer a chosen people based upon following certain rules. It was a vision and an understanding that this Roman, who probably worshipped in a very different way, but who had a fear of God, was as equal in sight as Peter was. If we can begin to wrap our heads around the fact that we worship a certain way, we have certain language, we have certain understandings, but it doesn't make us above someone else. It makes us different. Then perhaps we become the congregation and the community that this place needs.